American pressure on Israel, not Israel, while visiting Israel, and unacceptable to Israel, to the land of Israel.
Welcome to Eyes on Israel. I'm Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. By now, you have no doubt heard the allegations that Israel is starving the civilian population of Gaza, that there's an urgent need to increase the quantities of humanitarian aid due to an impending famine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken mentions the need to increase shipments of this aid into the Gaza Strip every time he opens his mouth about the war Israel is fighting. The false claims of starvation in Gaza have been one of the main pillars of attack on Israel by international NGOs masquerading as courts, such as the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, and the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which has accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant of war crimes and crimes against humanity for starving the civilian population. An array of UN agencies and some international aid groups continue to criticize Israel for not allowing enough aid in and for impeding the delivery of aid to the Gazan population. So is it true? Are the people of Gaza facing starvation? Is Israel preventing aid from getting to the people? The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, is an agency connected to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization and officially viewed as a neutral and authoritative agency whose purpose is to warn of and draw attention to famines and looming famines around the world. According to the IPC, a famine can be determined when three conditions are met. 20% of households face an extreme lack of food, 30% of children are suffering from acute malnutrition, and 3, there are at least 2 adult deaths or 4 child deaths per 10,000 people per day from starvation. An IPC report from the end of June stated that a survey conducted by a Palestinian agency on behalf of the World Food Program from April 20th to June 9th surveyed 1,104 households with a combined total of 5,707 individuals, in which 42 deaths were reported from all causes, including violent deaths from injuries sustained during the war. This gave a crude death rate, the mortality rate from all causes of death of a population, of 0.55 deaths per 10,000 people per day from all causes. So according to the IPC's criteria, in order to determine that a famine is occurring, there must be at least 2 adult deaths or 4 child deaths per 10,000 people per day from starvation alone. So there's obviously no famine going on. Then there's the question of the quantities of food being delivered. According to the World Food Program, another subsidiary of the United Nations, 4,298 tons of food are needed per week to feed the entire population of Gaza. According to the World Food Program's own numbers, from October 7th, the day of the Hamas attacks, to the end of March, 250,000 tons of food were delivered as humanitarian aid. Approximately 10,000 tons per week, more than twice the amount needed according to the World Food Program's own numbers. And with all the international pressure on Israel to increase the amount of food aid coming in, April and May actually saw an uptick in the quantities, with another 177,000 tons of food coming in over that time. This brought the average tons of food per week entering Gaza since October 7th to 13,371, more than 4 times the amount needed according to the World Food Program. In the month of June alone, over 5,000 truckloads of aid were delivered into Gaza. At 15 tons per truck, this means that 75,000 tons of aid were delivered in June. Remember that the World Food Program says that Gazans need just over 4,000 tons of food per week. Now, not all the aid is food, but much of it is. In addition, it's been widely reported that there are over 1,000 truckloads of aid sitting on the Gaza side of the Kerem Shalom border crossing, meaning it's already crossed in and it's just waiting for UN aid workers to pick it up and deliver it, but they can't get their act together to do so. Maybe the reason it's not being picked up is that there really isn't such a need. There's a lot of food in Gaza. In May, the World Food Program declared that there was already, quote, a full-blown famine in Gaza. But their own numbers contradict that. And the IPC report that came out 1 month later, just at the end of June, stated, quote, the available evidence does not indicate that famine is currently occurring in Gaza. According to the report, none of the 3 criteria for famine that I mentioned earlier exist. But lest the IPC commit the mortal sin of stating facts that make Israel look good, the report nonsensically concluded, after saying that there's no famine in Gaza, that, quote, the situation in Gaza is catastrophic and there is a high and sustained risk of famine across the whole Gaza Strip. So they contradicted themselves. After saying there's no famine, they said there's a risk of famine, which is, I guess, a statement of conjecture that it's impossible to argue with. According to the UN's own numbers, 3% of the population of Rafah were poorly fed in the month of May. In the more northern parts of the Gaza Strip, the number was higher, at around 6% in Khan Yunis, which is in the middle of the Gaza Strip, and 13% among those who had failed to evacuate from the north. That means that 87% of Gazans, even in the north where they had failed to evacuate, were not malnourished. The overwhelming majority of Gazans, according to the UN's own report, had, quote, acceptable quantities of food. As award-winning British journalist Jake Wallace-Simons recently pointed out in The Telegraph, according to the World Food Program, 14% of Gazans faced hunger in 2022, long before the war began. This means that the percentage of Gazans going hungry is actually lower now than it was before the war. Believe it or not, this actually makes sense. You see, before the war, there weren't thousands of tons of surplus food funded by NGOs all over the world pouring into Gaza every day due to international pressure. Simons goes on to say in his Telegraph piece that he recently spoke to a contact living in one of the camps for evacuated Gazans who told him, quote, food is available, everything is available, meat, chicken, vegetables. It's not even aid. It's coming from Israel, brought in by private people through the Kerem Shalom crossing and sold to us as a business. The prices are much better, just a little bit higher than before the war, end quote. This was a relief, the contact went on to say, as for 7 months prior, Hamas had been stealing the humanitarian aid and selling it to the population at exorbitant rates. Now that goods are being brought in through other means, they're being sold as normal and at lower prices. In other words, earlier in the war, when all the food available was from official humanitarian aid deliveries, Hamas was selling it for high prices to the population. And now that Israel has ways of getting food directly to the population, bypassing Hamas, prices have basically returned to pre-war levels. So, if there's really no shortage of food coming into Gaza, why is the State Department continuing to push the lie that Israel must do more to increase the amount of aid? What do they gain from promoting this false narrative? Let's also bear in mind that the Israelis have every incentive to bring in as much food as possible so that they are immune to this criticism that's coming to them from all over the world and these international criminal court proceedings. They really have nothing to gain by withholding food. Since the beginning of the war, I have stated time and again that despite statements to the contrary, the Biden administration is committed to protecting and preserving Hamas. From Biden's and Blinken's repeated statements that destroying Hamas is, quote, unrealistic or impossible, to the proposal of a ceasefire deal that leaves Hamas in power, as Biden proposed, to the attempts to prevent Israel from entering Rafah to destroy Hamas's remaining organized brigades, the mask is finally off. The lies about humanitarian aid are a key part of the Biden administration's attacks on Israel in two ways. First, they demonize Israel, making Israel seem like the aggressor, denying basic human rights, and the cause of a humanitarian disaster. This gives moral justification for prosecutions of Israel by the ICC and the ICJ. It increases international isolation of Israel diplomatically and ultimately adds to the pressure on Israel to end the war or back off of their military goals. But the constant demands to increase the amount of aid to Gaza also is a direct way of helping Hamas survive. As I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of the aid brought into Gaza falls into the hands of Hamas. Besides the fuel, a significant part of the aid coming in, which is literally used to fuel the Hamas war machine, Hamas also sells the food to its citizens. This means that the humanitarian aid is a steady source of revenue for Hamas, allowing them to continue to survive and to continue to exert control over a desperate and suffering population. The lie about humanitarian aid, along with the phony claims of excessive civilian casualties, are the two pillars of falsehood that the Biden administration and the mainstream media rely on to justify pressure on Israel, to isolate the Jewish state diplomatically, and ultimately to save Hamas from destruction. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel in just a few moments. Welcome back. Bible lovers yearn to uncover the authentic meaning of the Hebrew Bible, but often feel stuck with English translations. There's so much more to discover, but they don't know the Hebrew. Israel 365 has the perfect solution. Israel Bible Plus. Israel Bible Plus is a revolutionary way to access the treasure trove of Hebrew Bible wisdom, no matter where you are in the world. With a subscription to Israel Bible Plus, you'll gain exclusive access to premium video courses from top Bible educators in Israel. These scholars will unlock the secrets of the Bible and transform your understanding of Scripture. You can't find courses like these anywhere else. But that's not all. Every month, you'll receive a new lightweight volume of the Israel Bible in a stunning full-color design. It's not just a Bible, it's a personal study companion with space for note-taking, maps, charts, transliterations. You can take it anywhere. Transform your Bible study experience today. Sign up for Israel Bible Plus and uncover the true depths of Scripture. Your journey to a deeper understanding starts right now. Sign up for Israel Bible Plus today at Israel365store.com. That's Israel365store.com. On October 7th and since, and Israel's war to defeat the genocidal jihadists who threaten its existence, we have seen an explosion of Jew hatred in cities and especially on college campuses. As we've documented on this show, the pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, and anti-Jewish tent camps and demonstrations have also been decidedly anti-American. Of course, the rise in overt Jew hatred is not confined to the United States. European cities as well have become hotbeds of anti-Semitic incidents and demonstrations in recent months. One country that has seen one of the most dramatic and shocking explosions of Jew hatred is not in Europe and it's not the U.S., it's America's neighbor to the north, Canada. According to Toronto Police Deputy Chief Robert Johnson, nearly half of all hate crimes so far in 2024 have been against Jews. As the Globe and Mail reported, quote, in a single week in May, a Jewish girls' school in Toronto was shot at. Bullets were found outside a Montreal Jewish school and inside a synagogue, and a Vancouver synagogue was set on fire. And over the July 1st Canada Day weekend, 2 synagogues in Toronto were vandalized, end quote. And over the past week alone, a group of British Columbia teachers has launched a human rights complaint against their union, accusing the British Columbia Teachers Federation of having engaged in and enabled anti-Semitism. And a member of parliament from Montreal, Anthony Housefather, who's Jewish, was called a neo-Nazi in flyers posted in his area. The posters called on Housefather to, quote, get out of Canada. And they were emblazoned with a Nazi flag and a modified Israeli flag with a swastika instead of a Star of David. The image was accompanied by the words, Zionism equals terrorism. And it was announced just a few days ago that Birju Datani, who was just recently appointed by the Canadian Attorney General to lead the Canadian Human Rights Commission, is about to be investigated before his tenure even begins because of past associations with radical anti-Israel elements. Datani reportedly gave a presentation to the Muslim Research Forum in 2015 in which he said that terrorism was a rational and successful strategy to be used against Israel. Joining me now to discuss this disturbing trend is Ezra Levant. Based in Canada, Ezra is president of Rebel News, which has become one of the worldwide leaders in independent journalism. Those of you who remember the trucker protests in 2022 or the amazing on-the-street coverage of the World Economic Forum in Davos will remember their work, among many, many other groundbreaking stories. Ezra Levant, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Thanks for having me.
So, Ezra, Prime Minister Trudeau recently appointed, after that incident with the MP Housefather, Trudeau appointed him to deal with the anti-Semitism issue. Is this just, as far as I can see, Trudeau is no friend of Israel. How do you interpret this entire trend and the specific incidents I mentioned?
Well, the former Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, was a very principled supporter of Israel, and he won over a significant number of Jewish voters. So when Justin Trudeau first ran to be Prime Minister in 2015 against Stephen Harper, he made a pretty savvy political calculation if you take the morality out of it. His calculation was, in all of Canada, there's about 400,000 Jews, but there's, at the time, 1.5 million Muslims, and it's growing. And if Trudeau couldn't win the Jewish vote because Harper had it locked up, well, Trudeau would pivot against that and go for the Islamic vote. And he would always campaign in every city he went. He would make sure to go to the local mosque. That helped him win the leadership of the Liberal Party. And he has opened up the floodgates for mass immigration since. Trudeau has quadrupled the amount of immigration, and now there's about 2 million Muslims in Canada, about 5% of the population. And so there are 60 districts in Canada out of 338. We have 338 local districts in our parliament. 60 of them, the Islamic vote is a significant factor, whereas for Jews it's maybe half a dozen. And so Trudeau has simply decided, as his popularity in general falls, that he's going to support his base. And so he has gone more dramatically for Hamas than any government in Canadian history. He has condemned Israel in the language of Hamas. He has repeated Hamas propaganda blood libels. And in fact, he has voted against Israel at the UN in a way never before seen, so much so that a Hamas leader literally did an English language video praising the Canadian government. When Hamas stops to thank Trudeau, you get a feeling for how insane it is. So that's how he is in foreign policy. And domestically, whenever there's these attacks on Jewish schools or synagogues, or these hate encampments that have persisted for months, or the weekly demonstrations that have locked down the streets, Trudeau turns a blind eye to it because those are his street enforcers. Those are his shock troops. And he has never condemned any of these encampments. He has never condemned the hate marches. Why would he? They're his people. Justin Trudeau is only at about 21% in the polls right now. So the Muslim vote is a very significant part of his base. I think that Justin Trudeau will likely lose the next election, but he still has 1 year to do atrocious things. Here's an example. He has given tens of millions of dollars to the UN Relief Works Agency, which is basically a front group for Hamas, a group that was implicated in
UNRWA.
Implicated in the attack on October 7th. Trudeau has shoveled tens of millions of dollars. There's a member of parliament from Somalia named Ahmed Hassan. He's sort of our version of Ilhan Omar. In fact, he's friends with Ilhan Omar. He's in Trudeau's cabinet. Trudeau has made him responsible for foreign aid to Gaza. He's always doing photo ops from the Egyptian border with Gaza. Trudeau is firmly with Hamas, and he's not shy about it. He wants people to know because he's counting on the Islamist vote.
So is this just a matter of electoral politics, that if Polyev, who's the conservative candidate who it seems is quite pro-Israel and pro-Jewish, that if he wins, this all goes away? Or is there a deeper problem with the Canadian population at this point?
It is a demographic problem. There are 2 million people in this country who are Muslim. Now, obviously, not all of them are Islamist. Not all of them are political. Some of them are political refugees from Islam. Some of them are secular or anti-radical. But I'm afraid to say not a single mosque that I have ever seen in Canada has condemned the October terrorism. Not a single mosque has condemned Hamas. There may be individual Muslims who are against terrorism, but they don't speak up because there is such a peer pressure to be radical. If you want an idea of where Canada is headed, look to the United Kingdom, where on July 4th they had their national elections. They have 650 districts in their parliament, and 5 of those districts went to independent pro-Hamas candidates that beat both the Conservative and the Labour Party. They're in districts where the Muslim vote is 30, 40%, and the candidates ran on a purely pro-Hamas platform. They would literally campaign not with British flags, but with Palestinian flags. That is what happens when you have mass third world immigration, oversampling from countries where anti-Semitism is endemic. Trudeau has recently announced he's going to take thousands of refugees from Gaza. Well, Gaza is the most anti-Semitic place in the world. For 20 years, they have been inculcated in actual Nazism. And of course, the people who would leave Gaza would be chosen by the government there, which is Hamas. So Trudeau is literally importing people from the most pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic jurisdiction in the world. Of course he is, because they will vote for him against the Jews.
So we have a minute and a half left. The question in my mind, and full disclosure, I lived in Canada for a number of years. I went to college there at York University in Toronto, and I have a lot of friends in Canada. And my friends, my Jewish friends there, are telling me that things are getting bad. How do you see the future of Canadian Jewry? Quickly, we just have a minute and 10 seconds left, and then there's tack on to the end how people can follow your work and how they can follow the work of Rebel News.
Sure. Well, I think that demographics is destiny. And unless we immediately turn off the tap to Islamist immigration, we're going to go the way of the UK. And by the way, so will America. Think of Canada as your dystopian time machine. What happens to us today happens to you in 5 years. If folks want to follow what we're doing in Canada, you can go to rebelnews.com. And from there, you can find our work on Gaza and Israel and Hamas, or any of other journalism. I think we could be characterized as conservative and populist, and we have quite a few American viewers.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Ezra, especially the work of Avi Yamini, what he does out there bravely. I mean, he steps into dangerous situations, and he's a proud Jew. He's a proud supporter of Israel. He's a phenomenal journalist. I think all of my viewers here remember what happened with the trucker protests and the WEF coverage. So I just want to also take this opportunity to thank you for everything you're doing, and thank you for joining Eyes on Israel. The Israel Bible is like no other Bible you've ever seen. The Israel Bible combines the original Hebrew text with clear, accurate English translations that bring these ancient words to life like never before. It is filled with beautiful charts, maps, and illustrations. The Israel Bible is vital for anyone looking to deepen their understanding of the Bible. To purchase your Israel Bible, go to getmyisraelbible.com today. Welcome back. One of the topics we've been discussing on this show for months is the Jewish electorate. Many of you probably watched the special that I did with Steve Bannon on War Room a little while ago, all about the Jewish electorate. You can still find it pinned to my profile on Getter and on X. On that episode, one of the people we spoke to was Rabbi Michael Barkley. Rabbi Barkley pointed out that in addition to the wonderful pro-Israel policies of the Trump administration, Donald Trump also added Jewish identity to the definition of Title VI, the Civil Rights Act. And what that means, as we talked about more recently in a segment with Sigal Chadha, that means that Jews who are being discriminated against for being Jewish, as we're seeing across campuses all over America, are able to sue for discrimination only because of President Donald Trump. These are just a couple of examples of the way Donald Trump helped the Jewish people and Israel in particular. To quote the president recently, and I agree with this statement wholeheartedly, any Jew in America who votes for Joe Biden at this point should probably have their head examined. But nevertheless, with Jews historically voting Democrat upwards of 75 or 80% of the time, and this includes 2020, we still see many, many Jews stubbornly sticking to the Democratic Party, but there's good news ahead. More and more Jews are waking up to the reality to where our friendships really lie and why it just makes a whole lot more sense for the Jewish people to come over to the Republican Party and to voting for Donald Trump. At the forefront of this activism, at the forefront of bringing Jews out of the Democratic Party and to where they're supposed to be, is Michelle Terris. Michelle Terris is the president and founder of JEXIT, a movement to bring Jews out of the traditional Democratic Party and into the Republican Party and the Trump movement. And Michelle joins us here on Eyes on Israel. Michelle Terris, welcome finally to Eyes on Israel.
Good morning. Well, it's morning here. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much. Such an honor and pleasure to be with you today, especially on America's birthday. So happy birthday, America. And we must reelect our greatest president that has been in the White House for Israel and the Jews.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, this is being recorded on July 4th, although our viewers aren't going to see it on July 4th. It is an exciting day. And we should also point out that as Jews, historically, we've been wandering in the exile for thousands of years. And in many places that we lived, it was good for a while and then it was bad. But there has never been any place in the entire 2,000-year exile of the Jewish people that has been a more hospitable environment, a better place for the Jews than the United States of America. And I often say, and I've said this publicly here in Israel, that even Jews who don't live in America should celebrate July 4th because the United States of America has been the greatest friend that the Jewish people worldwide have ever had. So Michelle, talk to us a bit about JEXIT. Talk to us a bit about what's going on in the Jewish electorate. Is it true, like the polls in New York are showing, that more and more Jews are coming over to our side?
I saw a poll a couple months ago that showed 54% of Jews in New York voting for President Trump, and similar polls were done in the battleground states showing that the same, over 50% of the Jewish electorate voting for Trump. Well, in 2020, as you said, Trump received only 29% of the national Jewish vote. We feel at JEXIT that the Jewish vote potentially can flip these blue states to red. So we are optimistic, and we are going for the fight of our life because we must get President Trump back in office.
So can you talk a little bit about what JEXIT is doing?
So one of our greatest and most proudest moments was we were the first Jewish organization to award President Trump with the American Defender of Zion Award, November 1st, 2022. I met President Trump in 2021. I was at a meeting with one of the advisors, and he had come off of the golf course, and he saw that we were a Jewish group that were discussing one of the most important issues that we wanted to face, and that was to mobilize Jews and Christians to vote intelligently in 2020, of course. At any rate, we saw what happened, and we went into full throttle to engage our greatest friends, which are the evangelicals. So we put together a proposal, And we were sitting there at actually in Mar-a-Lago. He came off the golf course and he saw a group of Jewish women and he said, "What's wrong with you people?" At which time I got the opportunity to say, well, President Trump, in the state of Florida, when JEXIT was founded, we were able to work with organizations like the RJC to raise the Jewish vote in 2016 from 29% to 2020, a whopping 43%. And how did we do that? Empowering other people by speaking out. We know that the media is not our best friend. And with our social media, with our rallies, speaking up in school boards against Holocaust denial, which is what we were dealing with here, Jewish bullied students, women like us, Esthers, modern day Esthers and Mordecais, using our voices, we were able to raise the Jewish vote from 29% to 43%. So when I explained that to him, he still said he was really hurt by the Jewish community after everything he's done. The Abraham Accords, being the first sitting president to go to the Kotel. I mean, my heart broke. When I went home that night, I got on my knees and I prayed. I said, we've got to honor this man. We've got to give him an award. And lo and behold, a year later, there we were in Mar-a-Lago on a stage with President Trump, presenting him with the American Defender of Zion Award, a Meisler, beautiful, beautiful piece that portrayed Jerusalem. And we presented it to him. He came in with Secret Service with a prepared speech, mind you. He walked up to the podium, ripped up the speech, and said, "This is boring." And he ended up giving our group an hour-and-a-half rally of our own. He's an incredible human being. And one of our spokeswomen, our celebrity spokeswoman, Siggy Flicker, whom you'll meet, she was our hostess at that event, and it was just incredible. He banters back and forth. You feel like you're sitting with him one-on-one, that he's speaking to you. He's passionate. He loves the Jewish people. He loves the Jewish community. He loves Israel. He's nothing like what he's portrayed in mainstream media. We're so grateful for people like you with shows like yours, because when you meet him, it's just incredible. I can't say enough about the man.
All right, Michelle, we only have about a minute left. So let everyone know how they can connect with you, how they can follow the work of JEXIT, if there are Jewish viewers or anyone who really wants to get involved in this effort to educate more and more Jews about the truth and bring them over to our side. How do they get involved? Let her rip.
You can find us at our website, jexitusa.org. Our Instagram was recently disabled. We are one of the only Jewish organizations that came out for President Trump since day one. We've never wavered. And, they don't like that. So you can find me on my personal Instagram, which is Michelle Lubin Terris. But you can go to our website. It gives you all the information. Siggy Flicker's our celebrity spokeswoman. She's very vocal. And basically, that's where you can find us and get involved with us. Get involved with us nationally. I'm a CD25 delegate. I'll be at the RNC fighting for President Trump on the floor. And we're flipping Jewish Democrats and independents every single day to the Republican Party, and we're proudly doing it. And we can tell you right now, I can tell you my prediction. 2020, President Trump received 29% of the national vote. 2024, President Trump will double that vote, Jewish vote.
Amen. From your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Michelle Terris, for joining us on Eyes on Israel.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Israel is under attack. Terrorists who want to murder Jews and Christians are trying their hardest to destroy Israel, and most countries of the world are helping them. Our own president, Joe Biden, has shamefully stabbed Israel in the back over and over. Now, more than ever, we must stand with Israel, and the best way to stand with Israel is to go to Israel. Join Rabbi Tuli Weiss and Israel 365 for an unforgettable mission to Israel that brings the ancient and modern stories of the Holy Land together. Experience the Bible firsthand on this incredible journey from the Galilee to the Gaza border to Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland. On this heartland tour, you will meet real heroic Israelis fighting with incredible courage against Hamas and Hezbollah. Many have lost their loved ones and their homes. By coming to Israel and being part of this ministry of presence, you will give these heroes strength. Come to Israel now and fight back against Biden's disastrous two-state solution. We know that missions to Israel are expensive, and that's why we're offering flexible payment plans so you can pay in installments over 12 to 24 months. Everyone should have the opportunity to visit the Holy Land. Join us this August or October on a life-changing mission to Israel. Israel is counting on you. Book your trip today and stand with the people of the Promised Land. Go to Israel365.com/tours to find out more. That's Israel365.com/tours. These IDF widows have lost everything. As they grieve for their husbands, they're also scrambling to make ends meet. Please give generously at idfwidows.com for the heroic widows and orphans of the fallen soldiers of the IDF. That's idfwidows.com. Since the beginning of this war, one of the topics that we've talked about, that everyone's been talking about, and that we notice in the media and in the streets of our cities, is what we call the Red-Green Alliance. Red meaning the Marxists, green, the color representing the Islamists, the jihadists, the jihad supporters. And what we've seen is this strange blend of, again, these progressive left-wing Marxists who tend to be atheists and very progressive and liberal in their values, working hand in hand with Hamas supporters, with jihad supporters, essentially in support of Islamic fundamentalists. And we all point out that this feels a little bit weird. What really do these people have in common? Why would atheists and adamant extreme jihadists be working together? They seem to not have a whole lot of common in their belief systems. And we've talked about that a little bit on this show. What do they share at a spiritual level? We know that they both oppose the biblical foundations of the Judeo-Christian West. That's certain. But that doesn't fully explain it. And to a lot of us, it also looks like a kind of brand new alliance with a lot of strange things like Queers for Palestine. But Izabella Tabarovksy has done a lot of work investigating this Red-Green Alliance. She is a scholar of Soviet anti-Zionism and contemporary left anti-Semitism. Izabella is also a senior fellow with the Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities and a senior advisor with the Kennan Institute at the Wilson Center based in Washington, D.C. Izabella Tabarovksy, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
To be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Izabella, I just mentioned this Red-Green Alliance, and again, it looks like something brand new that's birthed out of intersectional progressive ideology, maybe just a simplistic expression of the victim ideology, that here the Palestinians are viewed as the brown people who are victims of the European colonialists. That's the way it's presented. But I've been reading your research, and I've been really chomping at the bit to have you on the show. I've been reading some of what you wrote, and also I had the honor to hear you speak a couple of months ago. And you're someone who's really given a lot of thought about the history behind this alliance between Marxist leftists and the agenda of jihadist anti-Israel activists. So could you lay out some of that background, educate us? I'm sure our viewers are chomping at the bit, as I am, as I just said, to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think we have to start with the fact that most of what we hear today emanating from those quarters, emanating from the progressive woke anti-Israel left, repeats virtually word for word what the Soviet Union used to propagate in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s as part of its anti-Zionist propaganda, which itself was part of its broader propaganda directed at the West. So anti-Western, anti-American propaganda couched in the ideas of anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, anti-racism, et cetera. It was extremely cynical. It was just using all of these ideas. But this was a huge part of what it did. And this was a huge part of what allowed it to unite very disparate forces. As much as it's very similar to what we see today. This very kind of broad propaganda allowed it to bring together the third world, the non-aligned movement, the global left, the Western left, Marxist left, non-communist new left. So all of them could unite under these very broad statements with the idea, the kind of the underlying Soviet idea was to create an alternative global opinion that would be against the United States, against the West, in support of Soviet foreign policy goals. Of course, the last part, they kept quiet. They didn't say it out loud, but this was the idea.
So where do the Islamists come in? Because as far as I can tell, Islam is not overtly communist or Marxist. So where does the cooperation, as it were, is it just kind of a convenience that they found some allies in these progressive leftists who also hate the same people they hate? Or is there something more integrated and more actively cooperative between these groups?
Look, I think to a considerable degree, it is a marriage of convenience. But again, we have to look back. There is a lot of history to this. The Soviets began working with Arab regimes already in the 1950s. Egypt, Syria were their greatest client states. They, of course, weren't Islamist in the sense in which we understand this term today. They were certainly the Egyptian regime, the Nasser regime was nationalist, secular regime. But the relationships begin to be established then. The Soviets very much supported Palestinian terrorist organizations. Again, we have to understand that this is part of the Soviet idea of gaining influence in the third world so that they can kind of build forces against their main Cold War opponent. But the anti-Zionist propaganda is also a very important part of it. So the third world is important because at this time, of course, there's a genuine decolonization process going on, right? There's a lot of sort of anti-imperialist rhetoric it actually has meaning as opposed to today. Today is just empty rhetoric, and the Soviets turned it into that. But another aspect of it is the anti-Zionist rhetoric. And where does it come in? The anti-Israel rhetoric. So in 1967, Israel won, of course, in the Six-Day War over Soviet Arab client states. And this point was a real moment of shock for Moscow. They really couldn't understand how is it that such a small country could win over these big, armies that the Soviets financed and trained and equipped. And Soviet intelligence services were always inclined toward conspiracy theory and anti-Semitic conspiracy as well. And they begin to develop this whole conspiracy theory about Zionism. They say, well, Israel couldn't have won on its own. It must have been in cahoots with America. And what is the ideology driving this? Well, it's the ideology of Zionism. Of course, Zionism is something completely different, but they redefine it. They begin to associate it with all of the kind of evils that are out there, right? Secular evils. So classic anti-Semitism compares Jews to the devil, but they are secularists. And so they don't talk about the devil, they talk about the Nazis. So they begin to compare Zionists with the Nazis and with fascists and with apartheid. They compare Israel to apartheid South Africa. And they say that Zionists are racist. So every evil that you can think of, they attach it to Israel and they attach it to Zionism. Every cause that was really important at the time for the left in the West, they begin to attach that cause to the Palestinian cause. So they begin to compare the Palestinian cause to the war in Vietnam and the civil rights in the United States and the anti-apartheid movement, so that to make the associations for people with all of that. And so they begin to internationalize the Palestinian cause. And I think that in that, they gain a lot of credits with the Arab states who begin then to see some of the Arab states were anti-communist. Like the Libyans were Gaddafi, they did not love the communists. But at some point toward the early 80s, they see that the communist bloc is saying all the right things about this crucial cause, right? The Palestinian cause, the anti-Zionist cause. And so they understand that there is a lot here that they can do together. And I think that this is when the contemporary Red-Green Alliance really begins to take off.
Wow. So, Izabella, we only have 2 minutes left, but I can't help but think that with all the geopolitical changes that have happened, now the main communist threat to America isn't the Soviet Union, but it's the Chinese Communist Party. And we see that they have gotten into bed with the Iranians. And of course, there's been all the reports about Chinese weaponry being found in Gaza. Do you think that this is just an extension of those same alliances of America's communist enemies getting in league with Israel's enemies?
I see a lot of the very same patterns. You know, a lot of the people who were in the anti-Israel, anti-imperialist alliance back then, you know, and I use quotation marks because it really is very propagandistic. It's not really, it was very much cynical and insincere, certainly on the part of the USSR. So a lot of the same countries that were in that alliance are in the, are again getting into the anti-Western alliance. You know, it's a little bit less, you know, the left today is much more mixed. So I don't know if we call it a communist threat. I think it's much more complex. Today's left identifies itself as something else, although there's certainly plenty of people who call themselves communists and socialists among the anti-Israel forces. But whatever the name for this new ideology, it's very anti-Western, it's anti-liberal democracy, it's anti-American, and I think it's very dangerous.
So I think the lesson for Americans who are watching this is that this Red-Green Alliance is not just a kind of recent shallow marriage of convenience, but it's a much longer term arrangement. And also that those who oppose Israel on the world stage are really only seeing Israel as a proxy for the United States, and it really has to do with their anti-American ideology. Just speak to that for a moment and then tell everyone where they can follow your work.
You just put your finger on it. I think this is what's so important. And I know that a number of people have noticed that the anti-Israel demonstrations that we see, the rallies, the encampments that we see in the United States are very much driven by the anti-Americanism by ideological anti-Americanism. I mean, they burn the American flag, right? They talk about tearing down the United States. I think the anti-Israel cause is the anti-Western cause, and we all need to understand it. And we all need to unite against it because the danger is real. The danger to the West is very, very real. And it very much moves on that momentum that began decades ago. I'm on Twitter, now known as X. My handle is @IzaTabaro. I write for Tablet Magazine and for Fathom Magazine. People can find me online, and there's more to come.
Thank you so much, Izabella. And very shortly, we will be releasing a podcast with Izabella on the Shoulder to Shoulder podcast. We'll be interviewing her for a longer form conversation if you want to learn more about these issues. Izabella, thank you so much for joining Eyes on Israel.
Thank you for having me.